Hello, my name is Tracy Hudson. I'm from the State University College of New York in Cortland, and I would like to welcome everyone to what I hope will be a transformational experience in terms of impacting one's practice with regards to creating a culture of care for all. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and move into my next slide, which is typically a shared agreement. I won't talk about it all, but what I will share with you is what's in green. And so for me, when I do my shared agreements, I always think about green for growth and green for glow. So some people will come into this work and they're going to grow from the new information they're going to get. And then some people are going to glow because you have a level of expertise already in this type of work that we're going to dive into today. And so it's just going to affirm some of the things that you already know. So let's be sure to create a space for both experiences. And if you agree with this list, please just go ahead and give me a thumbs up or some type of reaction. And with that being said, we can go ahead and move into what this presentation is going to be all about. So here's a really, really brief overview. You could take a look at it. I'm going to give you a tad bit of an overview on what I consider to be the research on care or care research. And then I'm going to go into my theory of practice. It's called Invitational Theory. And then I'm going to give you a framework that I use to create a culture of care for all called the I-CORT Framework 2.0. Then we'll have some takeaways. And of course, if there are any questions, comments, and/or concerns, we can have a brief conversation afterwards. And if I run out of time, I will make sure that I give you my information so we can stay in touch since we have just created this wonderful experience together. So with that being said, let's go ahead and talk about this word care. So in the field of educational research, much has been written on the concept of care. And as educators, or in some cases, future educators, because I also work with pre-service teachers, give me a thumbs up if you think it's essential to show care towards all of your students. Wow. It's certainly beyond the scope of this presentation to provide a lengthy review on the literature of care. It is essential to distinguish between the following. So in this slide, I have two concepts. We have caring about versus caring for. So to do that, let's go ahead and look at these two continuums. I want you to look at caring about and caring for on what I would like to say a caring continuum. So at one end, you have care about, which may include the emotional concerns, thoughts, or feelings you may have for your students. Whereas at the other end of the continuum, you have care for, which are the behaviors or the proactive actions taken to address these concerns. So different. Care. And sometimes we don't think about the continuum that care might exist on, but I need you to think about that before I unpack my theory of practice. And so the continuum begins, the continuum between caring about and caring for illustrates the transition from emotional empathy to empathetic action. So it's not just, the empathy, it's empathetic action that we need to think about when we are addressing the needs of students. In fact, it highlights the interconnectedness of feelings and actions in providing support to others. So in the context of this presentation, I want you all to understand that caring is not just about feeling empathy, it's about turning that empathy into meaningful action. Okay. So you can go ahead and take a look at that. We move from emotions, which are thoughts and feelings, right into the behavioral aspect of caring. And so empathetic action is the takeaway I want you to remember, empathetic action. And it's not just the feelings, but it's also about those meaningful actions. So creating a culture of care. So the goal of this presentation is to provide you all with a framework that I call the I-CORT 2.0. So to begin unpacking this framework, I would like to present you with the following questions. And of course, you can use the chat box to give me a simple yes or no, a simple yes or no. How many people believe all students are able, valuable, and responsible and should be treated as such? Go ahead and drop that in the chat box. If you believe all students are able, valuable, and responsible and should be treated as such. Well, let me review for some or present to others a theory of practice called invitational education. Invitational education is a theory of practice coined by the late, great Dr. William Perky. In fact, he just passed a couple of days ago. I had a great conversation with him as I was unpacking some of his work. He is absolutely my mentor. And invitational education, which was coined by Dr. William Perky, is based on an imaginative act of hope that explains how human potential can be realized. Okay. It asserts that all students are able, valuable, and responsible and should be treated as such. The theory assumes that people are only using a part of their many potentials and possibilities, just a part. And furthermore, every person and everything in and around schools will either add to or subtract from human potential. That's huge. You will either add or subtract from students' potential. So invitational education is more about the messages we send to our students affirming their worthiness. So this theory is built upon three essential pillars, right? And so the three pillars are the democratic ethos, perception theory, and self-concept, which together they form the foundation of creating a nurturing and an empowering learning environment. So let me show you these three, and I need you to think about, when did you first hear about these three pillars? Chances are you probably heard about them in some class you took early on in your learning and experience, sociology, psychology, philosophy. And so at least the question for me is, when you think about these three, how do these theories influence and shape your teaching practices? So let's go ahead and unpack democratic ethos. Democratic ethos is based off democracy, which is ruling by the majority, when everyone has a say, when everyone's voice is heard. Everyone's voice in democracy matters. It's doing with, not doing to, and learning is a shared responsibility. For example, when teachers have high expectations for girls, let's say in science classes, it can contribute to a supportive learning environment. Positive expectations can foster a sense of confidence and motivation, encouraging girls to excel academically in this subject area. The next one, perception tradition. Perception tradition is how each individual sees and comprehends events in their own experiences. Take a look at the 6 and 9. Depends on where you're standing, will dictate how you see things. Okay, it's as simple as that. Okay, and for example, when teachers have, in school settings, the concept about what's considered acceptable behaviors can be a matter of literally perception. So for example, school-age Black girls have been told to behave more ladylike or have been suspended from school for rolling their eyes at teachers, literally. In fact, perception is a big contributor to what we consider or call the school to prison yard pipeline. And perception significantly influences self-concept formation. And self-concept is how we see ourselves. It's the picture people construct about who they are and how they fit into the world. So messages regarding beauty, success, or gender identity deeply impact individuals' perception as they internalize these societal and social norms. And so negative feedback or experiences may result in a negative self-concept, whereas positive affirmations and supportive interactions can foster a positive self-concept. So grounded in these theories, democratic ethos, perception, and self-concept, hence the I-CORT framework, is born. So the I-CORT framework. Throughout my tenure as a middle school principal and now a current full-time professor, my commitment to caring for students was deeply ingrained in my daily practices. However, I never really understood what it was that I was doing. I just knew it was good for kids, and I just did it. However, I was introduced to this way of thinking by way of one of my mentors, and she introduced me to the work of Dr. William Perky's I.E. Theory of Practice. And then it was then that I fully understood the value of my efforts. Then I just did it, didn't know much about it. And many of us kind of operate in that way. We do good work, and sometimes we don't understand the nature of our good work, but I was introduced to the I-CORT framework. And so the I-CORT framework, okay, let me go ahead and click that. That's Mr. William Perky. And the I-CORT framework has 5 elements. At the center of its framework is intentionality. Intentionality involves acting with deliberate purpose and aligning your action with goals and values. If you believe that all students are able, valuable, and responsible and should be treated as such, then this should be reflected and practiced through the elements of care, optimism, respect, and trust. Okay, care extends beyond the needs, but encompasses genuine concern for people. I kind of talked about this. It's empathetic action. Optimism, hopeful expectations with favorable outcome. Are we helping students to see that their future is bright? That is our responsibility. And then respect. Respect is understanding that students have the right, this is students, they have the right to accept, object, or hold in debate messages that are sent to them. This goes back to democracy and allowing students to have the right to govern themselves. And then trust is building relationships so students can count on you when needed. So this is the original framework that Dr. William Perkey, that's Dr. William Perkey and myself at a conference, that's the framework that he came up with. But this still didn't rest well with me. And so with that being said, I introduced another concept to this framework. And I call this framework that I introduced next, I call it the I-CORT Framework 2.0. So while keeping the core elements of Dr. Perkey's work, I adapted this framework to include yet another concept at the center of the framework. So at the center of the framework, not only do I have intentionality, I also have intersectionality. So intersectionality is a concept that was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. And with that, she recognizes that marginalized individuals may have experienced overlapping systems of oppression and discrimination based on various aspects of their identities, such as race, gender, class, sexuality, disability, and others, and the ways in which they intersect and interact to shape individual experiences of privilege and oppression. According to Dr. Crenshaw, intersectionality is a call to think differently about how inequity is experienced. So consider, for example, a Black female student from Haiti who has a hearing impairment is the first in her family to attend a historical white institution. In addition to navigating the intersectionality of her race, gender, disability, first-generation status, and international background, she also encounters bias and faces daily microaggressions. So this illustrates the intricate layers of her experiences within the academic environment. So in its modification or iteration, new iteration, the I-CORT Framework 2.0 serves as a lens through which to prioritize and amplify the voices of students whose identities are marginalized by intentionally, this is intentionally validating lived experiences and resisting the temptation to oversimplify or ignore the complexities of their identities. And so this is Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw and myself. I had the pleasure of meeting her several times and interacting with her. And she actually helped me to bring my voice to the forefront by giving me the language to use when I speak about experiences and the multiple experiences I have as a Black female. So as I conclude this presentation, I would like to offer three takeaways, three things to consider. So implementing the I-CORT Framework 2.0 requires practitioners to approach their actions with intentionality and intersectionality. This framework empowers them to understand the lived experiences of marginalized groups and prioritizing voices and actively cultivating inclusive environments where everyone is valued and respected. Through this deliberate framework, practitioners convey messages of care, optimism, respect, and trust. Understand that this endeavor entails confronting systematic inequalities and challenging biases and advocating for inclusivity and justice. So practitioners must engage in self-reflection as an integral part of their practices. This happens often. They must critically examine their own identities, biases, and privileges to better understand how they influence their teaching, how these particular factors influence one's teaching practices and interactions with students. So self-reflection allows teachers to recognize and address any biases or blind spots that may impact their effectiveness in the classroom. Accept the fact, equity work is very challenging and you may feel like you are standing alone. Nevertheless, by embracing this challenge, with courage and determination, practitioners can significantly move towards creating a culture of care where all students are recognized as able, valuable, and responsible and treated accordingly. And that is the end of my time. I thank everyone for being attentive. and I appreciate everyone sharing in this space.